Welcome to another episode of Perfect Pour, the art of craft beer and spirits, the show about the wide, wonderful world of artisanal libations. I'm your host and spirit medium, Terry Collins. Join us today as we visit the brand new Copper Fiddle Distillery outside of Chicago in Lake Zurich, Illinois. We'll do some tasting notes for Jura Origin scotch, and we'll take a look at some of the seasonal craft beers that'll keep you warm as we head into the colder months ahead. So join us. Salud. A few weeks ago, the Perfect Pour crew visited Copper Fiddle, a new micro-distiller that opened earlier this year in Lake Zurich, Illinois. We talked with proprietors about their craft spirits and about their journey to introduce to the market a new bourbon and 2 new gins. Let's check it out. Today's show, we're firmly in the spirit realm here at Copper Fiddle Distillery, which opened earlier this year in March, outside of Chicago in Lake Zurich, Illinois. I have with me the proprietors, Fred Robinson, Jose Hernandez. Welcome to Perfect Pour, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Jose, you're an architect. Fred, a golf pro. So how do you make the jump from that to getting into opening a distillery?
Summer 2012. We happen to live about 3 doors away from each other in the neighborhood, over in Hawthorne Woods. I'm actually mowing my yard. I get off my tractor. My cell phone rings. It's Jose. He says, "Hey, you want to go in on a still with me?" And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" No idea about it. We get the still. We set it up. He throws himself into it 1,000%. Start playing around, a few recipes, and all of a sudden he hits on this bourbon recipe that's very good. We put it in mason jars and I take it to my golf tournaments. And the other pros try it and they're liking it. And they said, "Freddie, this is very good." So we did the research on what it takes to get into this business. We did the tours. We went to other distilleries. We said, we can do this. We can do it. If we're doing it on a small scale and people like it, all we got to do is increase the scale, right? One night over a couple bottles of red wine, we decided to get into the distilling business. And here we are a couple years later, and it's doing quite well.
That's interesting. And did you, what size still did you start with to get this thing off the ground?
It was a little 13-gallon pot still, a stainless steel pot column still. And it was actually very versatile. We actually have it in our tasting room up front. And it's, we use it a lot as a talking piece during our tours. And so it really served us very, very well. We were able to make a really nice bourbon out of it. It was a direct fire still. It was very versatile in terms of what you could do with it. I even customized a gin basket for it in the column, so we can convert it and make gins out of it and experiment with our gin recipes. So that's really kind of the genesis of how it all started.
This is a Friday. Work week is done. I like to kick back. We don't have drinks with us right now, but I want to talk about your products. They're very good, so I want to get a rundown of what you guys are producing right now and how they're unique.
Jose, his nickname is Killer the Distiller, so I'm going to let him take this one.
Well, we make 3 products, and it took us a little while to decide the portfolio, how we wanted to create our portfolio of products. We knew we wanted a whiskey or / bourbon at the time we were thinking about it. Whiskey and bourbon is going through a major worldwide resurgence right now, not only in this country but everywhere. And so that was an obvious one. So that was our number 1 product. Number 2 and number 3 were a little more challenging. We knew that we didn't want to go into the vodka business. We felt that it was a little overpopulated, a little oversaturated, and we wouldn't stand out. So we started looking around the different aisles and looking at the various products, and we came upon the gins. And when we were looking for the gin aisle at our local superstore, we couldn't find it because there isn't a gin aisle. The gin aisle is probably about maybe 8 feet long. And what's interesting about gins right now is that it's going through a major resurgence in Europe. is starting to research here again in the U.S. So we started looking at the various types of gins, and I started doing some research and discovered something called a Genever gin, which is basically Dutch style. And they invented gins, actually, back around 1650. So they're only maybe like 1 or 2% of the marketplace. So we wanted to stay unique because, number one, we're craft, we're unique. We want to create a unique product. So why not jump into a market that's really, really small and stand out in that market, okay, with a product that most people are not aware of, and you can educate them about it, okay, actually bring it back, because it's been around for hundreds of years and it's just not tried anymore, tasted anymore.
And that really touches on the essence of craft, too. The fact
Exactly.
That
it touches on a lot of different things. We ultimately played around with some Genever gin recipes that came out really good, actually, initially. Came out very, very good. And then stumbled upon our Tom gin, which is generically throughout the industry called a barrel gin or a brown gin, which is a throwback to pre-1920, basically pre-prohibition, of brown gins, which were really the majority of gins in the market at the time. They were stored in old whiskey barrels, transferred in old whiskey barrels. There were, at the time when we were playing around with this, maybe there was only about 6 or 8 or 10 distillers in the U.S. making it. And it was all local, very, very little. You wouldn't find it on a shelf anywhere. And now we're producing one, what we call a Tom gin, which is actually it's actually a reference to Old England, to London, and at the time. And so we're making those 3 products, all very unique, all resurging, and all craft and local.
And how did you come up, for example, with the recipe for your bourbon? How much experimentation was there with that? Is that
most of the bigger distillers in the U.S. use a 3-grain recipe. We use a 4-grain recipe. Corn, cracked barley, rye, and a 2-row wheat. So everybody's got a different mash bill. They keep that very close to the vest. It's kind of like your secret sauce,
right?
You know. So and I don't blame people for doing that. But we also tinkered a little bit with the barrels, you know, and the wood, you know, in the barrels, in terms of not just charring, but also doing a little toasting, you know, because most people don't realize that when they drink whiskey, other than Scotch whiskey, but you're drinking American-style whiskey, about 17–18% of the flavor of that whiskey comes from the still. The balance comes from your barrels. So we kind of played with the idea of toasting some of the wood, pre-charring it, you know, and whatnot, and that's where we're coming up with a little bit of a darker color tone to our product, and also a little bit of more of a caramelly, vanilla flavor. You know, and we do all one-pass distilling. We don't redistill. We do it all one pass. We make our cuts the way we want to make them, heads, hearts, tails, and that's it. We're done. You know, it's really very old school.
Very nice. And in terms of the bourbon, did you have like a flavor that you were going for initially, or did you just when you hit it was right? We were there. This is what
it evolved. We kept passing it around. People said, "I think you got it. I think you got it. This is it." And that's what we strove for. We still have those few sample jars. There's one sitting on my desk. There's a couple of floating around here somewhere. Hopefully nobody's drank them yet, or won't drink them. But and the other thing we do is we save every batch we make. We save samples of every batch we make, and because every batch is different, comes out a little different.
Okay. I want to go into a little more on the Tom gin, because that's interesting, and I tried it at the expo that we met you guys at last week. And I think you have it characterized as a whiskey drinker's gin, which I think is, or a gin that's accessible to whiskey drinkers.
Right.
And I think that captures it very nicely. Can you say a bit more about that? What were you going for?
The other thing that bloggers say, you know, in that vein, is that they've come up. The bloggers have coined it as a ginski, part gin, part whiskey. Right. So it's really what it is, because it's a gin put in whiskey barrels, old whiskey barrels. You know, and so it's picking up the residual color, the residual flavor. You know, the trick is balancing it out so one doesn't overpower the other. You know, and you can swing one way or the other in cocktails, or one way or the other if you're drinking it neat or on the rocks. You know, so the trick there is balance between what's left in the barrel, you know, and how long you want to keep it there to the flavor balance you're trying to get.
Well, I think you did a really good job with it too, because I typically don't drink my gins neat, but that one was
That one, a lot of people say
very,
that.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
very nice, very accessible in that way.
It's the biggest wow factor we have here. People come in, they always ask for the bourbon first, and we always try it. Actually, we try in the order of bourbon, clear gin, or clear fiddle gin, and tom gin last. And when they try that tom gin, first they look at it and they go, "That's a gin," and they give you this really kind of
First they
Yeah.
say they have a bad high school gin.
yeah, they have a
story.
bad high school gin story, right?
Yeah, so
right.
no, I'm
Everybody
not
has a
going to
bad-
have the
yeah.
gin. And
Right.
then when you give it to them, they go, "Wow,
Wow,
this is
that's actually the
unbelievable."
word you get. Wow,
Yeah.
or oh, ooh, wow.
Yeah, I think that's how I was too. Exactly. It was just not expected. Really.
Right.
Right.
We'll have more from our visit to Copper Fiddle Distillery in our next segment. But first, we're going to do some tasting notes for Jura Origin, an interesting scotch that's produced in smaller numbers from the only distillery on the Isle of Jura. And that was one of the things that led me to buy it, the fact that I hadn't heard much about it. Not much comes from Jura because there is only the one distillery. It was originally built in the early 1800s and it fell into disrepair, and they reopened it in the early 60s, and now they produce 4 expressions, one of which, the Origin 10, is what we're trying here tonight. A few other notes, interesting notes about Jura. I've done a little research on it. It only has 200 inhabitants, and the biggest employer on the island, of course, as you might guess, is the distillery itself. I also found out that George Orwell spent quite a bit of time there writing his book 1984, so the desolation of the island certainly might come into play for that as well. But the scotch itself, you can see, you may be able to, it is chill filtered, very clear. There is the addition of artificial color in it to give it that amberish sort of tone that you see in such scotches. And when I first stick my nose in, there is some heat, some alcohol heat. This is 10 years old, and I really wouldn't have expected that. It's got sort of a rough edge to it, and that's something really, really interesting at the start. And on top of that, you do get some sweet notes. There's a breadiness, a graininess to it. And I've already added water to this as well. And what the water does is open it up and takes off some of the heat that I originally got when I had it straight from the bottle. And it also brings out some of the fruitier flavors as well. Some of our other tasters got apple and pear, and I think there were some hints of citrus as well. For myself, I got the heat, I got some of the vanilla, the graininess, and in the finish, some burned sugar. There was also a note of ash or tar. Not peaty, it wasn't that sort of smoke, but there was a quality that was very distinctive that we sort of categorized as ashy or tarry. And not in a bad way, it's just a hint, just to give it some more interest. And so if I try it now, again, I stick my nose in, I can sense that heat, the alcohol, the roughness of it. But then you get the notes over the top that are sweet and really make you want to dive right in. So I'm going to do that right now. The addition of the water dissipates some of that alcohol burn. Initially, I could feel it on the tip of my tongue all the way back. With the water, I just feel it at the back. So that opens up the front of my tongue for some of the sweetness that comes through. And I can really get some of the apple, the pear, the fruitiness. And then in the finish, almost in an aromatic sense, I get a bit of tar, like just a hint of tar or ash. Again, it's a very interesting flavor. And it's a very different sort of scotch. The islands in Scotland, they all produce very different things. Jura is very close to Islay, and it's very different, except for one of their expressions, their prophecy, which is heavily peated. But this one is not. It's, again, a very young sort of feel to it. I'd almost guess it was like, if I just had this straight and didn't know an age statement, I would think maybe 3 or 5 years old. But it's very nice. It's worth searching out. And again, the prophecy is another one that you might want to search for. It comes in at, I think, 96 proof, 92 or 96 proof. This one comes to the US at 86. It's sold in the UK at 80. We get a few extra percent just because we're special. And it's very accessible. The prophecy goes for about double what the Origin is. But the prophecy is also non-chill filtered, and it has no artificial color. So it's another one to search out and to try. So there is some interesting stuff from the Isle of Jura, and again, I picked it up because I don't hear much about it. There's not much coming from it being the sole brand from the island, and so for me, that was like akin to being craft because you just don't hear much about it. There's not a whole bunch of it out there. I don't see a lot of shelf space for it when I go to the liquor store. So I thought, well, this is something interesting to try. And sure enough, I did, and I'm not sorry I did. And you won't be either. We'll be back with some more from Fred and Jose from the Copper Fiddle Distillery, and we're going to have some tastings for some seasonal brews later in the show, right here on Perfect Pour, the art of craft beer and spirits.